Hello and welcome everyone. I know it's been a while since I last posted a video. I've been taking an extended break over the holidays, but I have been playing through one of the Time Stories adventures, and I'll have videos of it up on the playlist as soon as possible. In the meantime, however, I've been working on something a little bit different. In addition to computer games and board games, I also really enjoy tabletop miniatures games. One of the games that I consider to be one of my favorites currently is Malifaux. I really enjoy the fluff, I really like the line of miniatures, and for the most part, I really like the game. Malifaux recently went into its 4th edition. It went a long way towards fixing some problems that the game had, but unfortunately, there are some things that I consider to be problems that the game hasn't touched. And it has added some new problems to the system. So, I'm hoping to be able to provide some suggestions on how to fix the problems and some modifications that I believe will improve Malifaux. Now, I have been playing, modifying, and even creating some of my own games for quite some time now, for many years. I have tried out many different systems. So I like to believe that I am somewhat qualified to be able to make modifications like this. Normally what I would do is I would only make a couple of minor tweaks to a game. If I ever need to make more extensive changes, I'm more likely to try and find a different game rather than spending the time to make extensive changes. But for Malifaux, like I mentioned, I really enjoy it, and I kind of want to continue playing it, but not in its current form. So I decided to try my hand at making some more extensive changes to the game. I'm not planning on completely rewriting the system, but this is definitely going to be a bit more than what I would normally do for a game. So these videos, there will be more than one. Um, I'm planning on doing this first one to cover the core rule changes, and additional ones for when I take a closer look at specific keywords and models. But the videos are to help me just kind of keep track of my mad ramblings, try and make better sense of everything. But I'm also hoping that at some point someone will stumble across these videos, they'll take a look at my suggestions, and they might even try some out in their own games. I would even like to hear suggestions that other people might have as far as their own house rules go. So if you have anything that you feel would be like improvements, or if there's any suggested modifications that you might have, please put them down in the comments below. I should mention that none of this has been play tested. It is just me doing this. Most of it is just eyeballing it. But hopefully I am familiar enough with Malifaux that these changes are fair and balanced. As far as they can be without hundreds of people playtesting it. But we'll see. So anyway, core rules. We'll start with one of the major hangups that Weird seems to have when it comes to Malifaux is treating it almost like a board game. They keep trying to flatten it down into a two-dimensional space. Now, 4th edition does a much better job at adding verticality to the game. However, there are a couple of weird quirks that are either still in the game or have worked their way into the game. The first of which is measurement. So the rules state anytime that you measure a distance, you are supposed to flatten the board out into a two-dimensional space to only measure the horizontal. Vertical distance is not taken into consideration. Now, if you're in a virtual tabletop environment like Tabletop Simulator or Vassal, it is a simple enough thing to look straight down and just measure the horizontal. Measuring tools can be set to 2D so that it kind of locks it into the horizontal space. However, this game is a 3D game. In fact, the majority of people will be playing this with actual miniatures, actual terrain on an actual board. Now, unless you are able to hover over the board and look straight down at it, measuring true horizontal distance is actually quite difficult. It is a lot easier to just measure true base-to-base distance, which is literally just closest point on one base to closest point on the other base. Or you just measure from the base out in all directions. So essentially, you were using 3D measurement. Pretty much every modern game does this. I don't know why Word continues to insist that the game board be flattened and horizontal measurements are the only way of doing it. Again, I don't know if they keep trying to force it to use board game mechanics or something. I don't know. But yeah, I would definitely ignore the horizontal only and just use true base to base. Again, especially if you're playing in the real world, it's just so much easier to do that. Just use a measuring stick or a ruler or tape measure or something. They have little measuring widgets and things you can use. It's so much easier to do base to base. The other thing that comes about from this whole terrain issue that Weird has is climbing. So again, 4th edition has gone a long way towards fixing the problems Weird has when it comes to terrain. However, it introduced some new climbing rules that are, for lack of a better term, totally bonkers. So in Malifaux, there are two forms of movement. There is a regular climb, and there's scaling. A regular climb is when, as part of a walk action, you move up to a piece of terrain, you then climb up, and then you move until at least 50% of the base is supported. Oops. But not like that. Problem is that these aren't properly flat, so they don't sit right. There we go, okay. So the whole distance moved is part of the measurement, including the vertical distance. Scaling is when you finish a walk action in contact with a piece of terrain, in which case you can, if you choose to, immediately teleport your model directly up and shift it over until the base is supported. The vertical distance in the shift is not counted as part of the movement. It is additional free move. You might be thinking, why would you ever climb when scaling allows you to teleport any distance without having to measure it? In fact, if you have a tower that's 3 feet tall, the model can just instantly teleport to the top and bottom every time it finishes a walk action. Well, the only time you would probably ever use a climb is if you're wanting to move up to something, climb up the top of it, and then continue moving across the top of it. You would have to have a monstrous amount of speed to be able to do something like that, but I suppose it's a thing that can happen. It's a ridiculous thing, especially because with scaling, your model teleports to the top and bottom, safe as sound, no problem whatsoever. But with climbing, if you don't have enough movement to reach the top or bottom, I guess, your model will just fall, and there's a chance it can take damage, depending on how high the thing is. Which, I mean, if you know you don't have enough movement to complete the thing, you're never going to do that unless you want to move up to the edge of something, start climbing down it, and then fall from the bottom of your climb distance, I guess. I guess that might reduce the damage that the model takes a little bit, maybe? I don't know. It's just a weird set of mechanics, and I don't know why it's like that. Um, so the suggestion that I have is basically just to use the climbing rules. Just ignore scaling entirely. Pretend that the model cannot teleport instantly between the top and bottom of tall objects. Just say that the vertical distance is part of the model's move. Now, how much speed it costs is up to you. I've got it at 2 speed for every 1 point of vertical movement, but that might be a bit too much. Might just make it 1 for 1, and that puts it more in line with the way it is in the actual rules. For models that have the Expert Climber special ability, you can simply make it that they can climb faster than a regular model. So you can do 1 speed per inch rather than 2, or 1 speed every 2 inches if you're doing 1 for 1. Now, if you're wanting to add a little bit more crunch to climbing, you can have it so that climbing can be done over the course of multiple activations. Or no, multiple actions. So a model can basically continue climbing from where it left off last time. You would need some way of being able to measure how far the model's climbed or how high they are off the ground. So you can use some dice, you can use one of those vertical extendable flight pole things. You can just use a piece of paper, as long as you have some way of being able to determine where this model is in the vertical space. And then the model can just continue climbing using future actions. If you want to add even more crunch, you can simply say that while a model is climbing, it is less likely to be able to defend itself and do stuff. So it can't perform actions, and it suffers a penalty to defense flips. Just giving it a penalty for being halfway through a climb. So that is just a suggestion for making climbing a bit better. And again, with the base measurement, it brings it more in line with how most games nowadays do things. But yeah, it's weird that from one edition to the other, weird always has some kind of strange problem when it comes to terrain and verticality in Malifaux. Like, don't get me started on the bizarre shadow rules for terrain from 3rd edition. Yeesh. But anyway, moving on to the next thing. Um, hazardous terrain. So one of the things in Malifaux is when your model moves through multiple pieces of hazardous terrain, it is only ever affected by the first. So if a model gets chucked through fire into a couple of thorny underbrushes, it'll gain a burning token from the fire, but for some reason, the fire makes it immune to the pokey thorns of the other bushes. Yeah. So the first instance of hazardous terrain makes a model immune to all other hazardous terrain it passes through during that particular move. It is a bonkers rule. I don't know if someone thought it was a good idea for game balance or something, but I don't, it's weird. It is so abusable and it's just horrible. So I simply say all hazardous terrain affects a model. You get chucked through a fire and then through 2 spiky bushes. You'll take a burning token and you'll take 2 points of damage. Now, obviously, if hazardous terrain gives a token, you will only ever get 1 token because in 4th edition, tokens don't stack. So gaining burning twice doesn't do anything, you'll still just get the 1 burning token. And if a piece of terrain is made up of multiple markers that are all in base contact with each other, that counts as one piece of terrain. Probably better to do it with the underbrush, but... so that's one piece of terrain. So even if a model moves through both markers, it will only be 1 point of damage. So yeah, that is just less abusable. And if you're stupid enough to walk your model through multiple instances of hazardous terrain, then you're going to get hit by it. So the next thing is soulstones. In previous versions, soulstones were used in multiple different ways. A couple of those ways have either become obsolete or have been worked into the, or are now treated, are now done different ways. For example, before soulstones could be spent in order to gain a positive flip. Well, positive flips aren't that great anymore. You can still cheat on a negative, and there's no damage flips anymore. So adding positives is not as important in 4th edition. Also, soulstones used to be able to add suits to a flip. Well, that is now done through empowerment, where a card of 5 or less is discarded, you add the suit to the flip. So that's no longer necessary for the soulstone to do. I mean, I guess you can still spend soulstone for a suit that you don't have, but the game is built around the fact that if you don't have it, you don't have it. One of the things that does not exist in the game anymore, and I think it was removed because of the way that models were reworked and because of the way they wanted to make the game quicker, is that soulstones can be spent to reduce incoming damage. Now again, part of 4th edition, one of the goals they wanted to achieve was make the game faster. They kind of succeeded. They were aiming to have the game playable in under 2 hours. It's not. Unless you really, really, really super know your crew and your opponent's crew, and you're just playing through at a blinding speed, it's not. It's gonna take more than 2 hours. They did a couple of other things to try and cut down on the time of it, but even still. So anyway, one of the things they made, the change that they made is that masters and henchmen are now a lot easier to kill. Because before, you could just spend soulstones, reduce the incoming damage by considerable amounts, actually. And the master and henchman, the only models that could spend soulstones, stuck around for quite a long time. Now, however, they're a bit squishier. They still have some defensive tech like armor and healing and such, but they tend to be a lot easier to take off the board. If you're wanting master and henchman to be a bit tougher, if you're wanting the game to last a bit longer, then you can reintroduce the soulstones to reduce damage thing. Since there's no damage flips really anymore, I think that a damage reduction flip is not a good idea. Maybe just have it reduce it by a flat amount. Like, soulstone reduces it by 1 or 2 points of health. Again, depending on how tanky you want your masters and henchmen to be. But I'm thinking that it's not worth adding back in. Like I said, the game lasts long enough as it is. Masters and henchmen are already reasonably difficult to get rid of. So I don't think it needs to be a thing anymore. But there is one use of soulstones that I think does need to be returned. It is something that has been added onto totems, but based on some rules that I'll be going over in a moment, I'm going to be removing it off of totems. And that is card draw. So before, you were able to spend soulstones to draw additional cards into your hand. That was replaced by the fact that hand size is now 7 cards rather than 6 that it used to be. And every totem in the game has a thing that you can spend a soulstone on to draw cards. Now, again, based on what I'm doing to totems in just a moment, I'm going to be removing that ability off of them. I would honestly, even if I wasn't making the changes to the totems, I probably would have removed it anyway, because I think it works much better as just a general rule. And at the very least, it gives every crew something to spend a soulstone on, because in 4th edition, the only thing that you can spend soulstones on right now is activating triggers and abilities. And not every crew has a good selection of soulstone triggers and abilities. So this at least continues to give every crew something to spend a soulstone on. But yes, at the start of a turn, you can spend soulstones to draw 3 cards and then discard a card. These are done separately. So you draw 3 cards into your hand, and then from your hand, including the 3 cards you just drew, you can choose one to discard. I was thinking about making it once per turn. I don't know if there was a limit on how often you could do this in 3rd edition, other than just the number of soulstones that you had to spend. I don't know. Maybe it was a once thing. I don't know. I'll have to check on that. But anyway, so I got it limited to once, just because otherwise you could just burn 6 soulstones and get 12 additional cards in your hand, and that's a bit much. Even though you won't have any soulstones for anything else. So yeah, that's that. There's one other thing that I wanted to mention, but it's something that I've decided not to mess with, at least not yet. And that is strategies. In particular, this bit here, double victory points for turn 4. So this is a little problematic, and it's something that did come up during the playtesting quite often, actually. A lot of people were very concerned about this, but it was kept in because, well, because. I think it's meant to be a catch-up mechanic, which, oddly enough, these two strategies, Boundary Dispute and Informants, both have 2 catch-up mechanics. One where if you're falling behind in points, and one where you get the double points at the end on the turn 4. But plant explosives and recover evidence don't. They have ways of being able to score additional victory points, but these can be done at any point at the end of any turn in the game, not just at the end of turn 4. And they don't have the catch up for falling behind in victory points. So I don't know why these have 2 different forms of catch up and these ones don't. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with these strategies and how they actually play in game to know. And I didn't really see anything about it during the playtest. So at the moment, I'm not going to mess with these. I'm assuming that just part of the basic rules includes a catch-up, and that it didn't need these extra bits. I'm still a little concerned about this double victory point on turn 4, but I think that's because these strategies are meant to be backloaded. Like, you're meant to be aiming towards gaining the strategy points at the end of the game. I also noticed someone doing a review of the strategies, and they mentioned that these strategies are designed so that you can focus more on the schemes, getting points from that, and then just grabbing a quick 2 points at the end of the game. So these are more schemey strategies, whereas these are supposed to focus more on the strategy than the schemes. I guess? I don't know. So yeah, they're a little bit weird. I wouldn't mind seeing what strategy they come up with for the next gaining grounds, which is whenever they refresh the strategy and scheme pool. And see what they replace these ones with. Because these ones are the playtest strategies. Be interesting to see what happens when they come out with their first proper set of strategies. So anyway, honorable mention. I'm not going to mess with it. I think it just requires a bit more practical testing. But I'm going to assume these are fine despite my concerns. uh, yeah, anyway. Alright, so that is it as far as the stuff that affects the game and just how it plays. The next couple of things I'm going to mention is stuff that affects the models. I'll go over the suggested changes and why I'm making these changes, but as I mentioned at the start of the video, I won't actually go over the models in this video. That'll be for the other videos. So if you're interested in seeing how these changes affect the models, then continue on to either the rest of the videos or whichever one is for the crew or faction of your choice. So the first of the model affecting rules is removing factions. This is something that's been a long time coming. In fact, I think it should have always been this way. When you look at a game that has factions, you think of something along the lines of Warhammer or War Machine. A game where each faction is a cohesive whole, thematically and mechanically. There are a selection of different leaders, and you can mix and match the troops under them, but it all kind of works. Thematically, they all work together, and mechanically, it's just how you want to play, what objectives you're going for, what models are your favorite. Malifaux is not that. Thematically speaking, every master and their keyword models are very thematically tied together. It means that mixing and matching just looks wrong. The models from one keyword don't really work well with other keywords. And especially in 4th edition, which has gone above and beyond as far as really heavily punishing you for even thinking of going outside your keyword. Mechanically speaking, taking out of keyword models is just not a good idea. Not just because of how the core rules absolutely punish the crap out of you for doing so, but because the models themselves just don't work as well when taken out of keyword. There are some of them like I know them as the Nephilim, but they're called the Brood now, from Neverborn. Their signature ability, their black blood, their acidic black blood, is something that they only get if they're taken in a crew led by Nikima, if they're part of her keyword. If they're taken out of keyword, or if they follow any other master, they lose their acidic blood. Okay. So yes, I think that when we were just creating Malifaux, they saw other games and said, oh, other games are divided into factions. I guess we should have factions. And they really made an effort to try and make the factions work. Each faction had a leader, which unfortunately was then removed from the game, so congratulations on that, I guess. There were faction upgrades that could be taken by any keyword that are now gone. They're not in 4th edition anymore. In fact, the only thing tying the factions together are versatile models, which there's only a couple of them left. And honestly, the factions could probably do without. So, yeah, I think from the very start, Malifaux was meant to be a game where each crew was its own individual thing. Or each keyword, in this case. There are other games out there that do that. A lot of them are kind of build your own faction, crew, build your own crew, warband, skirmish group, whatever. But there are no factions in them. Each crew is its own separate thing. And that is what this should have been. I think the factions should have been, were meant to be more like categories. Cowboys went into Guild, dead stuff went into Resurrectionist, magic-y things went to Arcanist, and monster-y stuff went into Neverborn. Everything else that didn't fit one of those categories went into Outcast, which was eventually split into Ten Thunders and Bayou, and, well, still Outcast. The Outcast was all the mercenary groups, Ten Thunders is all the eastern stuff, and Bayou is the gremlins and swampy stuff. But again, none of the masters or their keywords work together, thematically, mechanically, fluff-wise. There is nothing holding any of the factions together. I think the guild is the closest one that actually works as an actual faction. Because the different keywords within the guild are meant to be the different departments within like a military police force kind of thing. So that one works the best, but even still, not really. So yes, I think that the factions, Weird just needs to get the balls to admit that they made a mistake as far as making them actual factions and just dissolve them. But they're not going to, unless they completely reboot Malifaux. I think we're stuck with the factions, which really sucks. But anyway, yes, I think that I would suggest doing what Malifaux doesn't, or sorry, what Weird doesn't have the guts to do. Get rid of the factions. Now, because of that, what I was talking about earlier about totems kind of ties into this. So each master has a totem, a model that comes with them. It's a free thing that they always take. It's a mandatory thing. It's always part of the crew. Thing is, that's kind of what the keyword models are, at least with the dissolving of the factions. They're models that only go with that master. You don't have to take them, but they're only available to that master. So totems are just keyword models that you have to take. But it wasn't always that way. In earlier versions of Malifaux, totems were optional. They had a points value. You didn't have to include them in the crew. They were still limited to only being taken by their particular master, but they were optional. So I'm wanting to bring the totems back to that, especially because the totems are not equal in any way whatsoever. 4th edition made a bit of an effort to try and balance them, but still. I think the masters are the only things that you should be able to take for free and are somewhat considered equal to each other. I think the totems should be their own unique or minion models. So that's what I'm planning on doing. When I take a closer look at the miniatures themselves, I'm going to be removing the totem status, the station. They're either going to be removed entirely. I think some of them work better as markers, but the majority of them convert back into actual models with a points cost, and you don't have to take them and all that kind of thing. Because of that, and because of this rules modification I'm suggesting here, the totems, who each have this soul stone for card draw ability, should have that removed. They're not going to be automatically included in the crew anymore, and a lot of them, it doesn't fit them thematically. There are 1 or 2 of them that might keep it, because it kind of fits with the theme of the totem. But yeah, so remove factions, turn totems into normal models, if they're not removed entirely or converted into markers. So removing the factions doesn't really affect the models all that much. So for this rules change, it's only going to affect the totems. Okay, if you're still with me, then this is the final house rule that I'm suggesting. It is probably the biggest one. But I think it is the thing that I hate the most about Malifaux, is the thing that I truly believe needs to be rectified officially, but never will be. And that is remove friggin' summoning. And sorry for the strong language. But anyway, I don't like summoning in miniatures games the best of times. Usually it's not that big of a deal. It has such a minor impact on the game that it's not a problem. I still don't like it, and I try to avoid using it as much as possible. And I make sure that I let anyone I play with know that summoning is an issue, and I would rather not have it in the game. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and I just put up with it. But anyway, in a game like Malifaux, Malifaux is a game where action economy is a big thing. Board control is a big thing. Number of models is a big thing. Soulstone value, total soulstone value of your crew is a big thing. Balance between health and damage is a big thing. All of these things, they're big things in Malifaux, is affected by summoning. The models in the game have such a narrow point spread that bringing even a single model onto the board is a significant change to the total cost of your crew. You're not just talking about a couple of points here and there in an otherwise army that costs hundreds. We're talking about being able to add things that are like a 20th or even a 10th or more of the value of your crew. I mean, when the total soulstone cost of your crew is 50, and you're able to drop a 10-point model onto the board, that's a significant change. And it's a significant advantage. There are some masters that are like primary summoners that I've heard have been able to end the game with twice as many points as what they started with, which is ludicrous. So yeah, summoning in Malifaux is probably one of the things that is hurting the game the most. In any miniatures game, you have two forces that are meant to be roughly equivalent in power, and that is represented by points costs, both of the individual models and of the total of the entire crew. So if you're playing a 50 soulstone game versus a 50 soulstone opponent, you know that the forces are roughly equal to each other, or at least they should be. But if you start adding additional models during the course of the game, going above and beyond the 50 that you started with, that's a massive imbalance. Now, Weird has attempted over and over again with each new edition to try and balance out summoning. To the point where, like, adding a summoning token now onto a model that has been summoned gives a lot of nerfs. But even still, it doesn't matter. You can. There is no middle ground when it comes to summoning. Either it's like in Malifaux, it's either too significant of an addition, or it's been nerfed to hell and it's not worth it. So there is no making summoning work in this game. I think that summoning should just be removed entirely. I think that the only reason summoning was ever introduced into the game to begin with was to sell miniatures. Which again, Weird to begin with was a miniatures company. They only created Malifaux because their miniatures line was not doing so hot. It was very niche. Not many people were getting it. There weren't many games out there that used those miniatures. So it was only really the odd collector buying occasional one for a painting thing. Malifaux changed all that by adding a game to their lineup. Their entire line of miniatures just exploded. And summoning was a way to capitalize on that, because not only with summoning in the game, not only do you have to bring your crew, you have to bring your crew and everything they can summon. That means you have to purchase all of those miniatures. Now, granted, summoning in 4th edition is not as bad as it has been. I still have nightmares about the just insane summoning that was possible in 2nd edition. I think that's probably where I first started noticing that summoning was a big problem. Which it was. And in fact, it was such a big problem that in 3rd edition, they almost entirely cut it out. I kind of wish that they had entirely cut it out. They've brought it back somewhat for 4th edition. I think a little too much, but then again, any summoning is too much in Malifaux. So probably the biggest thing that I'm going to be looking at over the next couple of videos is removing summoning from all of the models that I'm going to be looking at. Not just models that can summon, but anything that affects summoning. So like models that have stuff that works off of summon tokens. Oh, I do want to mention that, yeah, so summoning tokens are a thing that you put onto a model that is summoned. There are, however, models in the game that can remove summoning tokens. So all of those supposed things that are meant to balance out summoning, yeah, you can just get rid of those. Which actually you can't. Sorry to go on a bit of a rant here, but according to the rules, there are several instances where it specifically says you can't do something unless something else. That's not the case for summon tokens. It just straight up says you cannot remove summon tokens. There's no if. There's no otherwise. It is just you cannot remove summon tokens. Which means technically, if an ability says remove a summon token, according to the rules, you can't. You weren't supposed to be able to. So those abilities that say to remove a summon token, they actually don't work. Now who knows, that might be errated at some point, but that's okay because based on my errata, my house ruled errata, summoning is no longer a thing at all. Now, one of the kind of snowball effects of this is peons. Peon is a station that's been added to the game that is a somewhat replacement for the old insignificant ability, which is a little weird because I think there are still models in the game that have the insignificant ability, but then there are also the peons. Um, Peons are basically just summon fodder. They are cheap, crappy miniatures that you put on the board for the couple of seconds before they just self-destruct. And you're just supposed to summon and wave assault them into the enemy. That's basically all they do. You can do the same with markers. You don't need miniatures to do that. So, in addition to looking at the totems, I'm also going to be looking at the peons. Now again, there aren't many of them. There's only a handful of them in all of the entire miniatures line. But the peons I'm going to be looking at are either gone entirely, replaced with markers, or converted, usually converted back into actual miniatures, because I think at least one or two of them that I'll be looking at were proper full-blown miniatures before they were downgraded to summon shit. But that is everything. There's not a whole heck of a lot. Like I said, Malifaux is a pretty good game as is. It just requires a few things to make it really shine. A lot of the rules modifications are just minor tweaks here and there. Even things like removing factions and looking at the totems is not really that big of a deal. The only real big thing is the summoning. That's probably the biggest change, and probably the biggest improvement that's going to be made to the entire game. Now, this isn't exactly an exhaustive list. Like I said way back, none of this has been playtested. I've only had a few games of 4th edition, most of it just playing against myself to try it out, and to test out some of my favorite crews. These are just the things that immediately jumped my attention. Now, as I continue to play, if I continue to play, I may end up finding more things to tweak, but a lot of the stuff that I was planning on adding to this list, I removed because 4th edition fixed them, which is great. It's a massive step in the right direction. It's just a shame that certain things are still part of the game, like this whole flattening to 2D and summoning garbage. But yeah, that about does it as far as the actual rules modifications go. So, thank you all so very much for watching. Hopefully at least one or two people have made it to the end of this video. If you are interested in checking out how these changes to the factions, totems, summoning, and peons affects the different models, then I'll be going over those in the other videos. Like I said, I'll be separating them out into different factions, so if you have a favorite faction, or you just kind of want to jump back and forth between them, you are more than welcome to. I'll have each one titled so you can tell which one is which. And again, I am not doing the entire line of miniatures. There are a couple of factions, for example, Ten Thunders and Explorer Society, that I'm not going to be including at all. Outcast and Bayou, I think I'm only doing one keyword from each. For the rest, about half the keywords will be included. So it's not going to be a huge thing. But yeah, hopefully it gives enough of a starting point that if you're wanting to convert your own keyword of choice, or if you're wanting to finish off what I started, you're more than welcome to. But I'm mainly just mainly just doing this based on, again, the keywords that I am most familiar with. I don't really want to touch other things that I'm not as familiar with because I won't know as much of how to replace things and get rid of things, if that makes any sense. Anyway, enough of this. So, yes, thank you so very much for watching, and hopefully I will see you again in the other videos. So, see you next time.